The rifle weighed 29 pounds unloaded. She picked it up off the support rest and moved it with one hand, briefly, the way you check something for balance before you commit to it. She found the balance point. She set it back down. She adjusted the bipod legs 2 millimeters on the left side. She checked the bolt. She looked through the scope. At the far end of the range, a range that had been designated as a long-distance evaluation area by the Combined Special Operations Sniper Coordination Board, a board that met twice yearly and whose purpose was to assess doctrine across units. The targets were set. 4 of them, steel plates 40 centimeters square, at 3,200 meters. 3,200 meters is not a normal engagement distance. Most military snipers train to 1,500. Elite operators who specialize work to 2,000. The documented world record for a confirmed kill at the time she was standing on this range was 3,540 meters. And that record had stood for 11 years and had been set by one person in one moment under conditions that would likely never repeat. She was not here for a record. She was here because a range evaluation had been organized for the Combined Sniper Course, and she was on the roster, and the range master, a master sergeant named Delacroix, who had 16 years in the sniper community and had trained more shooters than he could accurately remember, had looked at the roster, looked at her and laughed. Not a mean laugh exactly, more the laugh of a man who has encountered something he does not expect to last. "You're up after the Rodriguez block," he said. "The .50 caliber is already on the line." "Understood," she said. He watched her walk to the firing line. He was still smiling when he turned away. That was when she picked up the Barrett M82. The wind on the range came from the northwest at 7 to 9 miles per hour, with a 3-mile-per-hour gust cycle running every 40 to 50 seconds. She knew this because she had been on the range since 0600, 2 hours before the evaluation started. Watching, not shooting. Watching the mirage through a spotting scope. Watching the range flags at the 500 meter, 1,000 meter, and 1,500 meter markers. Watching the small movements in the dry grass at the edge of the impact zone. She had a data book. She had filled it for 2 hours. At 3,200 meters, the bullet would be in the air for approximately 6.2 seconds. In that time, the wind would push it. The Coriolis effect would push it. The elevation above sea level, they were at 4,400 feet, would affect the powder burn and the bullet's flight path. The temperature, which had dropped 4 degrees since morning, would change the powder velocity slightly. She had calculated all of this. She had done the math 3 times on paper in the data book and once in her head to check both. The first number and the third number agreed. The second was off by a fraction. She used the first number. She settled behind the rifle. She found the natural point of aim. She adjusted her body position. Not the gun, her body, until the gun pointed naturally at the target, without any muscle tension holding it there. She breathed 3 times. On the 4th breath, she let half out and held. The crosshairs settled. The wind was in the right part of its cycle. She squeezed. At 3,200 meters, you cannot hear the impact immediately. The sound travels separately, arriving after the visual confirmation. The target moved. She saw it through the scope at the moment of impact. The 40-centimeter steel plate, rotating on its hanger, hit dead center. Then 3 seconds later, she heard the sound, a faint, flat crack that arrived from the distance like an afterthought. Behind her, someone said something. She did not hear what. She was already working the bolt, extracting the spent case, chambering the next round, returning to position. The scope was still in the same position. Her body had not moved. The rifle had been allowed to recoil naturally and had come back to the same place, which was the fundamental truth of good shooting. You don't hold the gun in place. You let the platform take the recoil and return. She moved her hold 3 milliradians to the right. Wind had shifted in the last 40 seconds. She breathed. She fired. Second impact. She worked the bolt. Master Sergeant Delacroix was not smiling anymore. He was standing behind the firing line with a spotting scope on a tripod, watching the impacts. He had been watching since the first shot, which had hit on the first round fired, which at 3,200 meters was statistically implausible for any shooter who had not been to this exact range in these exact conditions with this exact rifle. He watched the second impact. He watched the third. He watched the fourth. 4 rounds, 4 hits, 4 steel plates at 3,200 meters. The entire string took 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which included the 2-minute pause between shots 3 and 4 when she had held because the wind changed outside her parameters, and she had waited without visible impatience for it to come back into range. Delacroix lowered the spotting scope. He looked at her. She was already off the rifle. She was sitting up behind the position, rolling her neck once to release the tension from lying behind the stock. Completely still, completely professional, looking at the data book in her hand and making a note. "Hey," Delacroix said. She looked up. He did not know what to say. He was 16 years into this specialty, and he had trained people who had done extraordinary things, and he had a technical vocabulary for what she had just done. Windage, elevation, natural point of aim, Coriolis, Mildot, ballistic data. But the technical vocabulary did not explain the thing behind it. The thing that was not technique, but was the thing technique was supposed to eventually approximate. The thing you either got to or you didn't. "Where did you train?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. "I've trained in several places," she said. That was not an answer to the question he had asked. It was an answer to a different question. The question of whether she was going to tell him. She was not going to tell him. He nodded. He looked at the range, at the 4 targets still hanging at 3,200 meters. 4 for 4, he said. "Yes," she said. "First shot at that distance, no ranging rounds." "Correct." He looked back at her. "Who else knows you can do this?" She looked at him with the expression of someone who has a very precise answer to that question and is deciding how much of it to give him. "The people who need to know," she said. He thought about that for a while. Then he said, "Sergeant, can I ask you what your day job is?" She closed the data book. She stood up. She was not tall. Average height, perhaps slightly below. But she stood the way certain people stand, with a quality of occupation of space that had nothing to do with size. "Currently," she said, "I'm a candidate on the combined sniper evaluation." And before currently, she picked up the Barrett M82 and returned it to the support rest in one fluid motion. "Before currently isn't relevant to the evaluation," she said. She walked off the line. There were 11 other shooters on the combined sniper evaluation. They were from different units. 2 from the 75th Rangers, 3 from Special Forces groups, 2 from a Marine MARSOC battalion, 1 from the 161st SAW, and 3 from units whose unit designations were listed on the roster in a way that suggested the designations were not the actual designations. The best score before her rotation had been 2 out of 4 at 3,200 meters. The shooter who achieved that had been shooting competitively for 8 years and had set a unit record at 2,800 meters 2 months before the evaluation. She shot 4 for 4. After her rotation, the range was quiet in a way that is different from the normal quiet of a shooting range between relays. It was the quiet of people recalibrating, of people who have seen something that does not fit what they thought they knew about what was possible. One of the rangers, a staff sergeant named Torres, who had qualified expert at every weapons qualification for 9 consecutive years, sat down next to the shooter from the 161st and said quietly, "Did she use ranging rounds?" "No," the 161st man said. "How?" Torres said. The 161st man shook his head once. He had seen extraordinary marksmanship before. He worked with extraordinary people, but this was in a different category. Not extraordinary within the category of expert marksman, but extraordinary in the way that made you question the category itself. "She watched the range for 2 hours before we got here," he said. "That's how?" Torres said. "That's part of it," the 161st man said. "The rest, I don't know." After the evaluation, Delacroix obtained her data book. He did not ask for it directly. He found it on the support bench after she had left, which might have been an accident and might not have been. He took it and sat with it for a while. The data book was thorough. She had been recording wind data since 0600. Every 40 seconds, a reading. Wind speed, wind direction, flag behavior at each marker, mirage behavior through the spotting scope. 2 hours of data, recorded with the precision of someone who had been taught by people who use data to stay alive. The ballistic solutions she had worked were correct. Not approximately correct, precisely correct, verified against the range's own atmospheric data, which he pulled from the station at the range control building. Her hold for shot 1 was in the book. Her adjustment for shots 2, 3, and 4, each one accounting for a slightly shifted wind condition, was in the book. Every adjustment was correct. 16 years in the sniper community, and he had never seen a data book that precise from a shooter he had not personally trained. He had seen data books from people he had trained that were not this precise. He sat with it for a while longer. Then he made a phone call to a number he had for a person at a command whose name he was not authorized to speak on an unsecured line. "I have a name," he said. "I need to know what I'm looking at." There was a pause on the other end. Then the person said, "How many rounds did she fire?" "4, Delacroix said. 4 hits, 3,200 meters. First round on target each time." Another pause. Longer this time. "You're looking at someone you do not have the context to evaluate," the person said. "Keep her data book. She left it for you. That's why it's still there." Delacroix looked at the book. "What does that mean?" "It means she wants you to understand what you saw. She wanted you to be able to verify it. She doesn't need your evaluation. She came here for a different reason than you think." The line went quiet. Delacroix held the data book and thought about that for a long time. The reason she came to the combined sniper evaluation was not the evaluation. The evaluation was the cover. The evaluation was the vehicle that got her to the range, with the right people, at the right time, without requiring an explanation that would have needed more clearance than most of the people involved possessed. The reason she came was the target package hidden inside the evaluation brief. 3 targets, real ones, real coordinates embedded in the fictional scenario that the evaluation used for its planning exercise. The planning exercise that the evaluators thought was just an exercise. She had been given the package 6 weeks before. She had studied it for 3 weeks. She had come to this range, this specific range, at this elevation, in this climate, at this season, because this was the only range in the continental US that had the specific combination of factors that would allow her to validate the ballistic solution for a real-world shot at this distance, in these conditions, before she needed to take it. She was not here to be evaluated. She was here to evaluate whether her solution was correct. It was correct. She had known it was likely correct before she came. She had done the math. But there is a difference between math and verification. And in her line of work, the difference between math and verification is the difference between a mission that succeeds and a mission that does not. She had verified. She packed up and drove to the airport and boarded a flight to a connecting city, and from there to another, and from there to a small airfield where a man she had worked with before was waiting with 2 duffel bags and a set of coordinates and a window that was closing. She was ready. 3 days after the evaluation, Delacroix was on the range running the next training day when one of his junior instructors pointed at the news on a phone screen. The headline used the word eliminated. The location was one that Delacroix knew. Not personally, but by operational context. He had heard the name in briefings. He had heard the name in the kind of hushed, specific way that indicated the name was attached to something significant. The article said nothing about method. That was normal. The method was the part that didn't get published. Delacroix looked at the headline for a while. He looked at the sky. He thought about a data book on a support bench, about 4 steel plates at 3,200 meters, about a woman who had not answered his questions, but had left him enough to figure it out himself. He thought about what the person on the phone had said. She wanted you to understand what you saw. He understood now. He gave her data book to his junior instructor and said, "File this under General Training Records." The instructor looked at it and looked at him and filed it. No one spoke about it after that. The range continued. Staff Sergeant Torres thought about it 6 months later, during a marksmanship training block at his unit's home station. He was running a junior soldier through position fundamentals, and the soldier was struggling with natural point of aim, the thing you have to get right before anything else matters. And Torres found himself saying something that he had not planned to say. "I want to tell you something I saw," he said, "on a combined evaluation. I'm going to change some details, but the thing I'm describing actually happened." The soldier waited. There was a shooter on that evaluation who hit targets at a distance that most people in this building will never be asked to shoot to. First round on target, no ranging rounds. She'd been watching the range for 2 hours before she ever picked up a rifle. She'd been building data, so the decision was already made before the shot. "She," the soldier said. "She," Torres said. He let that sit for a moment. She was not the person that anyone in that range area expected to be the best shooter on that evaluation. She didn't look like what you'd expect. She was quiet and she was precise, and she sat on that range for 2 hours before she touched the rifle. The soldier was quiet. The lesson, Torres said, is not about how far she shot. The lesson is about the 2 hours. The 2 hours are why the shot was possible. The shot is what the 2 hours produced. He paused. Most people skip the 2 hours. Most people show up at the line and try to figure it out from the line. She had already figured it out. The shot was the last 5%. Everything before it was the work. The soldier wrote something in his notebook. Torres watched him write and thought, not for the first time, about a woman he had seen for exactly 1 rotation on a range in the mountains, who had done something that could not fully be explained and had left behind a data book that explained exactly how she had done it, which was somehow the most confusing part of all. She did not debrief the evaluation. She did not write a report about it. She did not post-action review it in any official context. She did not, as far as anyone could tell, think about it for any longer than the time it took to pack up and drive to the airport. What she had gotten from it was what she had come for: verification. The solution was sound. The approach was correct. The conditions she would face in the real environment were different from the range in specific ways she had already accounted for, and the range had confirmed that her accounting was accurate. She had what she needed. She was already somewhere else. There was a phrase her instructor had used years ago in a session she was not supposed to remember, because the session had not officially occurred. He had been talking about a specific kind of practitioner, the kind that was rare enough to not have a proper category, who had developed a capability so internalized that it no longer required conscious execution. He had called it post-technical. The shooter who was post-technical was beyond the question of technique. Technique was automatic. What was left was pure reading. Reading the environment, reading the moment, reading the thing that was not yet, but was about to be, and placing the response at the right point in time. She was that. She had been that for long enough that she didn't think about it anymore. It was just how she moved through the world, reading, responding, never ahead of the moment, never behind it, right there, every time. The evaluation's range records showed her scores. Someone filed them in the correct folder in the evaluation's documentation. The folder was stored in a filing system that was not digital. Paper records for certain types of evaluations, kept in a physical archive at the range control building. The range master who filed them read the numbers twice before filing. He held the paper for a moment before he put it in the folder. Then he put it in the folder and closed the folder and put the folder in the cabinet and closed the cabinet and locked it and put the key back on the hook. He stood there for a minute. Then he went back to the range because there was a training day running and there was always more to do. But he thought about those numbers for a while. 4 for 4, 3,200 meters. No ranging rounds. First round on target. He had been on this range for 9 years. He had processed the results of hundreds of evaluations. He knew what was exceptional and what was historic. He was standing in front of something that did not have a prior comparable entry in the records he maintained. He filed it under general evaluation results. Same as everything else. Some things you file correctly and do not explain. The record exists. The numbers are there. If the right person ever needs to find them, they can find them. They will know what they're looking at. He went back to the range. There are things she never told anyone, not because they were classified. Some of them were, and that was part of it, but not all of it. Some of them were things that she simply had no use for telling. They were hers. They had happened. They lived in her body the way experience always lives in a body. Not as memory you access, but as capacity you deploy automatically when the situation requires. The first time she shot at serious distance, she was 22 years old, and she was in a country she had not planned to be in a situation that had deteriorated past the point where the original plan was useful. She had had a rifle and a target and a distance, and she had made the calculation by hand, in her head, because there was no time and no choice, and the calculation had to be correct or something very bad was going to happen. It was correct. She was not a prodigy. She was not gifted in any mystical sense. She was someone who had been in a situation where the standard was not competence, but absolute precision. And she had met the standard, and then she had gone back and done the work to understand why she had met it. And she had done that work obsessively and completely until the thing that had happened by necessity could be replicated by intention. That was all. That was everything. The 29-pound rifle, the 40-centimeter targets, the 3,200 meters, the 4 rounds. That was just work that had been done for long enough that it looked like something else. It was not something else. It was work. 6 weeks after the evaluation, Delacroix made a change to the sniper training curriculum. He added a 2-hour observation block at the beginning of every long-distance training day. Not shooting. Observation, wind reading, mirage interpretation, atmospheric data collection. He made it mandatory. He made it the first thing before the range went hot, before anyone touched a rifle. Most of his students thought it was excessive. He let them think that. At the end of the training cycle, the average score at maximum distance had improved by 11% across the cohort. That was the largest single-cycle improvement he had seen in his 9 years at the range. He wrote the curriculum change into the permanent training plan. He did not write the reason for the change. He put in the training objective: develop pre-engagement environmental assessment skills, and the time allocation, and the methodology. He did not write her name. He did not need to. She had not come to this range to improve his curriculum. She had come for her own reasons. But she had been here, and she had done what she had done, and he had watched, and now the curriculum was better. He thought that was probably fine with her. He thought that was probably, in some indirect way, exactly the kind of thing that happened wherever she went. The steel plate target was still on its hanger at 3,200 meters at the end of the evaluation day, when the range safety officer walked out to collect the targets at the end of the day. He found the plate and lifted it off the hanger and looked at the center punch mark. There were 4 of them, 4 marks from 4 rounds. They were close enough together that he could cover all 4 with the span of his hand. At 3,200 meters, he held the plate and looked at the grouping for a while. Then he put the plate in the transport vehicle with the other targets. When he got back to the range control building, he did not put it in the general equipment storage. He put it on the shelf in his office, next to a photograph of a unit he had once been part of. He put it there because he had never in his career seen a grouping like that at that distance, and he thought that was the kind of thing that deserved to exist in a space where he could see it, where he could remember that this was real, that he had seen it, that it had actually happened. She came back to the range one more time, 3 weeks later. Not for an evaluation, not for any scheduled purpose. She came alone at 0500 before the range opened, and she sat at the firing line and looked at the target positions at 3,200 200 meters in the early gray light. She was not second-guessing herself. She was not reviewing. She was doing the thing she did in quiet moments. The operational stillness, the complete present awareness, the zeroing out of past and future that left only now and what now required. She sat for 45 minutes. Then she drove back to the base, packed her gear, and flew out of the country on a flight that did not appear on any booking system that could be accessed without a specific clearance and a specific need to know. She was ready. She had verified. The work was done. Torres would carry that day on the range for the rest of his career. Not as a trophy memory, the memory of having witnessed something extraordinary. It was not that kind of memory. It was more useful than that. It was the memory of a recalibration, the memory of the moment when the ceiling of what he thought was possible had been located somewhere significantly higher than he had been placing it. That kind of memory is the most useful kind. It does not tell you how to do a specific thing. It tells you that a specific thing can be done, which is a completely different category of information. You can be told it is possible. You can be shown the math. You can hear from people who have seen it. Or you can see it. Torres had seen it. He carried the memory of that into every training block, every evaluation, every quiet conversation with a junior shooter who was hitting their ceiling and needed to understand that the ceiling was not where they thought it was. He never used her name. He always changed the details. But the core of it was always true. 4 rounds, 4 plates, 3,200 meters, no ranging rounds. She had known before she picked up the rifle. That was the thing he kept coming back to. She had already done the work. 6 months after the evaluation, a junior instructor at the range made a copy of her databook. Not the original. Delacroix kept the original, but the junior instructor had been given access to it when Delacroix was building the new observation curriculum, and he had photographed the pages, and he had spent a week going through the methodology. He made it into a training aid. He removed all the dates, all the identifying information, all the context that could be used to place it. He kept the methodology, the format of the wind readings, the frequency of the observations, the ballistic solution format, the adjustment notes between shots. He used it as an example in the new pre-engagement observation block. This is from an actual evaluation, he told his students. I can't tell you more than that, but this is what 2 hours of correct preparation looks like. This is what the data looks like when someone has done the work, and this is what the data produced. He showed them the target photograph, the 4 marks, close enough to cover with a hand. He let the students look at it for as long as they wanted. That's not a gift, he said. That's not talent. That's the result of this. He held up the data book. Done correctly, for long enough, until it was automatic. Nobody said anything for a while. Your job, he said, is to build that. That's what this curriculum is for. That's what this block is for. 2 hours on the range before you touch a rifle, every time, until it's automatic. He closed the training aid. He went on with the class. He doesn't laugh anymore. Not at roster names, not at people he hasn't seen perform, not at the ones who look wrong for the task. He had built 7 years of pattern recognition. He had used that pattern recognition to run his evaluations efficiently, to allocate his attention appropriately, to not waste time on people who were clearly not competitive before they got to the line. The pattern recognition was mostly good. Most of the time, the people who looked wrong were wrong. But the people who looked wrong and were actually the best shooter he had ever seen, those were the people that broke the model. Those were the people you remembered. Those were the people that, if you were paying attention, taught you something about the model. He was paying attention. He updated the model. He ran his evaluations differently now. He watched everyone with the same completeness. He looked at the person who seemed unlikely with the same attention as the person who seemed inevitable. He had learned the hard way that his pattern recognition had a gap in it, a specific gap that corresponded to a specific set of assumptions that had been with him so long. He had not noticed them until they were disproven in 4 rounds of .50 caliber at 3,200 meters. He was better at his job now. He was not grateful for the specific form the lesson had taken, but he was glad he had learned it. He thought sometimes that she had known he would learn it, that had been part of why she had left the data book. Not for him specifically, for anyone who was paying attention, for anyone who was watching. The people who knew what she could do were few and specific. Not because she had hidden it. She had not hidden it exactly. She had simply not announced it. She performed when performance was required. She did the work when the work was required. The results were visible to anyone who looked. But most people did not look. Most people had the same gap that Delacroix had, the gap that was built from pattern recognition that was mostly right and therefore was trusted more than it should have been, and that produced, in specific cases, a blindness to things that were outside the pattern. She had moved through a long career in the specific category of things outside the pattern. It had served her well. The people she needed to fool were fooled. The people she needed to not fool were not fooled. The record was there in files with various levels of classification for anyone with the right clearances and the right curiosity to find. Most people did not have both the clearance and the curiosity. The ones who did found something they had not been expecting. They found the data book. They found the range records. They found the confirmed targets and the mission files and the operational assessments. They found the picture of what she could do when the situation asked her to do it. They did not find the thing behind it, because the thing behind it was not in any file. The thing behind it was in her body, in her hands, in the 2 hours before the shot. You had to be there to see it. What 4 rounds at 3,200 meters taught to the people who were paying attention was this: the limit is not where you think it is. That was all. That was the whole lesson, delivered in 4 seconds and 6 seconds of flight time, and 4 flat cracks arriving from the distance like statements of fact. The limit is not where you think it is. This is not a comfortable lesson. The comfortable lesson is the limit is exactly where you think it is. The comfortable lesson is that the people who look like they belong at the front of the evaluation are the people who belong at the front of the evaluation. The comfortable lesson is that the category is closed and you know its boundaries. She was not a comfortable lesson. She was the proof that the category had a boundary you had not found yet. That was what Torres would tell his soldiers in the training blocks that came after, without using her name, without telling the story in a way that could be traced. The ceiling is not where you think it is. I have seen something that was on the other side of the ceiling. I am telling you this so you understand that the ceiling exists to be exceeded. That is why she was there. That is why she came. That is why she left the data book, so that someone, someday, would understand. Before she was this, she was someone who did not know she was going to become this. She was 19 years old, and she was at a civilian shooting range in a small town, in a state that she has never mentioned to anyone in her professional life. And she was shooting a .22 rifle for the first time because a man she was distantly related to thought it would be something useful to know. He was not military. He was a farmer with a practical view of the world. She shot the .22 and she liked it. Not in the way of someone discovering a passion, in the quiet way of someone recognizing a fit, the way a hand finds the right tool. Not exciting, just correct, right weight, right feel, right spatial logic. She understood intuitively what the rifle wanted from her body, and she gave it that, and the results were consistent in a way that the man who had taken her found notable. He did not say anything. He watched. He brought her back the following week. She shot it again. 3 years later, she was in basic training. 3 years after that, she was somewhere she cannot name. 3 years after that, she was in a position that requires a description the length of several paragraphs to even approximately convey, and the description would need to be classified at a level that most readers do not possess. By the time she picked up a Barrett M82 on an evaluation range in the mountains at a distance, the evaluation was not even officially designed to test. She had been doing this, the work of being this, for long enough that what she did on that range was not a demonstration. It was just a Tuesday. The night before the evaluation, she sat in a small room in a building on the range facility and looked at her data book. She had pre-computed everything. She had done the atmospheric math for 3 different temperature and wind scenarios, because in the mountains, the conditions shift, and you need to have already solved for the shift before it occurs, rather than solving in the moment. She read through the solutions once. She confirmed they were internally consistent. She made one small adjustment to the 3rd scenario, a rounding error in the wind value that would have produced a result within acceptable parameters, but not the result she wanted. She corrected it. She closed the book. She ate a small meal. She drank water. She did not think about tomorrow. Thinking about tomorrow at this stage was not useful. The preparation was complete. What was left was execution, and execution was not something you thought about. It was something you did, and thinking about it in advance was the surest way to introduce the tension that undid the natural point of aim and made the body hold the rifle instead of letting the rifle rest. She slept 7 hours. She woke 15 minutes before her alarm and lay in the dark for those 15 minutes in the operational stillness, returning herself to the baseline that she needed to bring to the range. Then she got up and drove to the range in the dark, 2 hours before anyone else arrived, and she set up the spotting scope and she started watching. Wind at distance does not look like what most people think it looks like. Most people, when they think of wind, think of something you feel on your skin. That kind of wind is too close to be useful for a shot at serious distance. By the time the wind reaches you at the firing line, it is already different from what it will be downrange. What you read is mirage, the thermal shimmer that rises from warm ground surface, visible through a high magnification scope. Mirage tells you the wind speed and direction at every point between you and the target. Not the wind you feel, the wind the bullet will travel through. You read the mirage. At 0600, the mirage was showing her a light southwest flow at the 1,000 meter mark, shifting to northwest at the 2,000 meter mark, and building slightly 2 to 3 miles per hour faster at the 3,000 meter mark. This was a common pattern for mountain ranges in the early morning. As the sun climbed and the terrain differential heating developed, the pattern would shift. By 0900, the differential would be expressed differently. She read the mirage every 40 seconds and recorded. By 800, she had 2 hours of data. She looked at the pattern. She looked at the deviation from her pre-computed scenarios. She was in scenario B, with a small modification at the 2,000-meter band. She made the adjustment. She confirmed the revised solution. She was ready. When the evaluation started at 0830 and the roster was called, and Delacroix looked at her name and looked at her and laughed. She was standing there with 2 hours of prepared data and a complete ballistic solution and nothing left to do but breathe and squeeze. The laugh was irrelevant. She had already done everything that mattered. The shooter who went after her on the rotation was a Special Forces staff sergeant who had been to the sniper course twice and had an operational record that included confirmed engagements at distances she did not know, because they were in files she did not have access to. He was good. He was one of the better shooters on the range that day. He scored 3 out of 4 at 3,200 meters, which was exceptional, an achievement that, on any other day, would have been the most talked about performance on the range. After her 4 for 4, he went to the range, shot his string, hit 3 of 4, and came back. He set down his rifle, and he looked at the target record posted at range control. He looked at her score. He looked at his score. He was quiet for a moment. Then he walked over to where she was sitting, cleaning the borrowed Barrett M82 before returning it to the equipment room. He said, "I've been shooting this distance for 6 years." She looked up. "What were you reading for shot 3? He said. "The wind shifted on me between shot 2 and 3, and I called it wrong," she told him. She told him specifically the mirage behavior at the 2,000-meter band, the precursor indicator that appeared about 15 seconds before the wind speed change at that band, the way the thermal pattern looked different from a stable condition versus a transitioning condition. He listened. He asked 2 follow-up questions. She answered them. 2 hours of observation before the range went hot, he said. 2 hours, she confirmed. He nodded. "Next evaluation I run," he said, "I'm going to be out here 2 hours early." "Yes," she said. She went back to cleaning the rifle. He went back to his spot. 4 for 4. He thought about that for a long time. There is something that experienced shooters know and rarely say out loud. At serious distance, the wind reads the shooter as much as the shooter reads the wind. What this means is that a shooter who is fighting the shot, who is holding instead of resting, who is managing instead of allowing, who is performing instead of being, produces tension. Tension moves the rifle. Movement at the firing point is amplified at 3,200 meters. A movement of a fraction of a millimeter at the muzzle becomes a miss at that distance. The shooter who has been fully prepared has already resolved all tension before the shot occurs. The preparation resolves the uncertainty, and uncertainty is what produces tension. When there is no uncertainty, when you know the wind, you have the solution, you have verified the position, you have done the work. There is nothing to hold. There is only the trigger and the breath and the space between. She had resolved all uncertainty 2 hours before she picked up the rifle. That was why the shots looked effortless. They were not effortless. They were the product of 6 years of accumulated practice in this specific discipline, combined with 2 hours of morning preparation specifically for this specific range and these specific conditions, combined with a set of characteristics she had developed in environments she does not discuss, that made the fundamentals permanent rather than practiced. Effortless-looking things are built from an enormous amount of effort. The effort is just older than what you are watching. The effort happened years ago, and it shows up now as the ability to be still. At the end of evaluation day, the range safety officer cleared the range and locked the gate. He drove back to the base in a truck with the target plates in the back. He drove past the airfield where two C-130S were parked on the tarmac, engines quiet, refueling hoses attached. He drove past the housing area where lights were coming on in the windows in the early evening. He thought about the grouping on that plate. He thought about it in the specific way that things you have seen but cannot yet categorize sit in your mind, not processed, not filed, just there, present, waiting for the category to form. He pulled into the equipment area. He killed the engine. He sat in the truck for a moment, 4 for 4, 3,200 meters. He got out and unloaded the targets and put them in their proper place and locked up the equipment bay. He kept that one plate. He kept it for 11 years. When people asked him about it, he said it was from a memorable training day. He did not say more than that. He did not need to. The grouping was self-explanatory to anyone who knew what they were looking at, and to anyone who didn't know. The plate was still remarkable. 4 marks, close enough to span with a hand. At any distance, that was precise. At 3,200 meters, it was something that would stay with you. He kept it on the shelf. He kept it as a reminder that the ceiling is not where you think it is, that out there, somewhere, there is someone who has already been to the other side of it. And sometimes they come to your range on a Tuesday, and they pick up the rifle, and they show you where the ceiling actually is. And then they drive away. And the range is quiet, and the steel plates hang in the distance. And you carry what you saw. Delacroix thought about the laugh for a long time. He thought about it in the specific way you think about a mistake that you understand only after the fact. Not in the moment, not while it was happening, but afterward, when the context has arrived and the thing you did no longer makes sense in the way it did when you did it. He had laughed at a name on a roster. He had taken the laugh from a pattern he had built over 16 years, a pattern that was mostly right, and he had applied it to a person before he had any information about that person except a name and a gender. He was not a bad person. He did not think he was a bad person, and the evidence of his career did not indicate he was a bad person. He was a person who had been operating from a model that had a gap in it, and he had not known the gap was there. And that was the only thing that could be said in his defense that was actually true. The gap existed. She showed him where it was. He closed it. That was the best version of the story, the version where a mistake is recognized and corrected and produces something better than what existed before. He tried to hold that version because it was the most useful one. It was the one that mattered going forward. But sometimes, late in the day, when the range was quiet and the evaluation results were filed and the lights were going down over the mountains, he thought about the laugh. He thought about what she had looked like when he laughed. She had not reacted. She had not flinched. She had not looked at him the way someone looks at a person who has just made a mistake. She had just turned away and walked to the firing line because she already knew. She already knew what was about to happen. She knew the laugh was irrelevant. She had been doing the work since 0600. The laugh was irrelevant. She had been doing the work since 0600. And the day after this evaluation, and the day after that, she would be somewhere else, doing a different version of the same work, with the same completeness and the same invisibility and the same results. And no one would laugh, because she would be in places where the people around her already knew, or she would be alone, which was how she preferred it, which was how she had always preferred it. The laugh on that range at 0830 was an anomaly. The rest was just ordinary days in an extraordinary life, doing the work, carrying the capability, being the thing she had become, quietly, in places nobody saw, for longer than anyone she met on evaluation days could imagine. 4 rounds, 4 targets, 3,200 meters, done before 0900, back to work by 0930.